It was the day Emma had always dreamed of. The day she would marry the love of her life, Ben. In front of their family and friends. In a ceremony that would mark the beginning of their forever. The church was beautiful. The flowers were perfect. And everything seemed to be falling into place. But despite all the excitement, a knot of anxiety lingered in her stomach. It wasn't about the wedding itself. It was about Max. Max was her rock. Her constant companion for over 13 years. Since the moment she adopted him as a playful, scruffy puppy. A German shepherd. Strong, loyal, and protective, Max had been with her through it all. From her childhood home to her college days. From the highs of life to the lowest points. Max had never once left her side. But lately, something had changed. Max had grown quieter, slower, and a little more distant. As though he were carrying the weight of the years in his tired eyes. The thought of this being his last year with her was unbearable. That morning, as Emma stood before the mirror, the final touches of her wedding dress still being adjusted by her sister, Claire. Her heart was heavy. She should have been feeling excitement. The rush of joy that comes with marrying someone you love. But instead, she felt a deep sense of concern. Max had been acting strangely the past few days, more lethargic than usual. Not eating as he used to. And seeming unsteady on his feet. Her family had urged her not to worry too much. He's just getting old. Emma, they said. He's been your loyal companion for so long. Maybe he's just feeling the years catching up with him. But Emma couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more was wrong. Max had always been so full of life. So full of love. And now, watching him lie there on the couch, barely able to raise his head when she called his name, filled her with dread. Are you okay, Emma? Claire asked, noticing her sister's pained expression as she fussed over the dress. I'm fine, Emma lied, trying to muster a smile. But Claire could see it in her eyes, the worry was consuming her. And Emma couldn't hide it any longer. I think I need to check on Maximum, Emma finally admitted. Just for a minute. I'll be right back. Her heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the living room, where Max lay curled up in his favorite spot by the window. He barely acknowledged her entrance, his eyes following her with a faint flicker of recognition before he closed them again. Emma knelt beside him, stroking his fur gently, trying to find comfort in the familiar warmth of his body. She couldn't imagine life without him. And the thought of losing him, especially on a day like today, felt almost too much to bear. Maximum, she whispered, her voice trembling. I need you to be okay. Just a little longer. Okay. I need you to be strong. She could feel tears threatening to spill. But she fought them back. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She couldn't let herself fall apart now. Not when everything had been planned for so long. But how could she not worry when Maximum, her beloved dog, seemed so frail? When the time came to leave, Emma kissed Max on the head one last time, promising she'd be back soon. As she stepped out the door, her heart was still heavy, but she pushed those feelings aside. She had a wedding to attend to. And for better or worse, Max would have to wait. The church was everything they'd dreamed of. The stained glass windows let in beams of warm light, and the scent of flowers filled the air. Ben was waiting at the altar, looking every bit the handsome groom she had imagined. As she walked down the aisle, her heart swelled with love, her gaze fixed on him, her future. But just as she was about to reach him, Max's presence in her mind lingered, the unease still gnawing at her. During the wedding photos, something unusual happened. Maximum, who had been left at home under the care of her father, suddenly appeared at the church. Emma's heart skipped a beat when she saw him. Her father had brought him, clearly in distress. And despite his age and frailty, Max still tried to move as though nothing was wrong. But he wasn't the same. There was something in his eyes. Something in the way he kept pressing his body against Emma's legs. Something that told her he was afraid. Max! Emma gasped, kneeling to hold him, her wedding dress momentarily forgotten. "What are you doing here, buddy?" Her voice broke as she noticed how weak he seemed, how his breathing was shallow and labored. Ben hurried to her side, concern immediately clouding his face. "Emma, is he okay?" he asked, his hand resting on her shoulder. "I don't know. Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice thick with worry. Max whined, nudging his head against her hand, clearly agitated. It was as if he was trying to tell her something she was too afraid to understand. "I'll call the vet," Emma said, her voice firm despite the panic rising in her chest. She took out her phone, hands shaking as she dialed the number. But even before the vet could answer, Max's condition seemed to worsen. He collapsed, unable to stand, and Emma's heart shattered. Her father, seeing her distress, gently put his hand on her arm. "Emma, don't worry about the wedding. Max needs you now. Go with him." Her father's words cut through the noise of the day. Her wedding. Her dream. The perfect day, none of it seemed important now. Maximum, the dog who had been with her through every heartbreak, every joy, every single moment of her life, needed her. And without a second thought, Emma knew what she had to do. "I'm going to the vet," she told Ben, who nodded with understanding, his face etched with the same concern. "You should stay here with the guests. I'll be back soon." But Emma didn't know if she would be back soon. All she knew was that her heart was with Maximum, and no matter what happened, she had to make sure he was okay. Emma rushed to the car with her father, her mind racing. Max's condition seemed to deteriorate with every passing second, and the fear in her heart was growing. She hadn't even thought to change out of her wedding dress, which now felt like a mere formality against the growing urgency in her chest. When they arrived at the veterinary clinic, her father helped her out of the car, his expression grave. They rushed inside, the familiar scent of antiseptic and the soft hum of quiet conversation providing little comfort. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it, focused entirely on getting to Max. Inside the clinic, the receptionist directed them to an exam room where Dr. Carter was waiting. He greeted them with a solemn look, his eyes immediately assessing Max as he lay there, barely moving. The older dog's breathing was shallow, and his eyes seemed clouded, as if he was struggling to stay alert. "Dr. Carter, please, what's wrong with him?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper, filled with raw fear. "Why is he acting like this?" Dr. Carter knelt down to Max's level, gently examining him, his hands firm but compassionate. "It looks like Max is in the early stages of heart failure, Emma. His heart is struggling to pump blood effectively, and that's likely why he's having trouble breathing and moving around like he usually does." Emma's world seemed to shift under her feet. Heart failure. She had known Max was getting older, but she had never expected this. It felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. Maximum, her loyal companion, the dog who had always been there, was now facing the end of his life. She could barely breathe for the lump in her throat. "We'll do everything we can to make him comfortable," Dr. Carter added softly, reading the distress in her face. "But at his age, and with his condition, he doesn't have much time left." Emma's heart broke at the thought of losing him. The idea that Maximum, the dog who had seen her through every chapter of her life, might not be by her side much longer was unthinkable. "But, what do we do now?" Emma's voice quivered. Dr. Carter placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "We can keep him here for a while to stabilize him. But I know it's a difficult day for you. If you'd like to stay here for a bit, we'll make sure Max is as comfortable as possible." Emma nodded, barely able to hold it together. "I don't care about the wedding anymore. I just want to be with him." Just then, Ben arrived. His face was drawn, his eyes reflecting the same deep concern Emma had seen in her father's earlier. "How is he?" he asked, approaching Emma cautiously, as if he feared disturbing the fragile moment. Emma turned to Ben, her heart aching, her emotions raw. He's not doing well, Ben." He has heart failure. Ben reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. We'll get through this together. Okay. You're not alone in this. She was overwhelmed with emotion. But Ben's presence, his steady calmness, was the anchor she desperately needed. They had planned for this day to be perfect. But right now, the only thing that mattered was Max. I can't believe this is happening, Emma whispered, tears filling her eyes. I thought we'd have more time. I thought I could be selfish for just one more day. Ben shook his head, his thumb gently brushing a tear from her cheek. You don't have to be strong all the time, Emma. You're allowed to feel this. And whatever happens, we'll get through it. Ben's comforting words seemed to quiet the storm inside her. But the reality was hard to face. Her wedding had been postponed, and all the guests who had gathered in the church now sat waiting, unaware of what was happening. The ceremony she had dreamed of, planned for months, seemed like a distant memory in this moment. Maximum, her lifelong companion, was all that mattered now. I have to make a decision, Emma said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. I can't just leave him here alone. And I can't go back to that church and pretend like everything is okay. Ben nodded. What if we make today about love, not tradition? We could have the wedding right here at the clinic, surrounded by family, love, and, of course, Maximum. Emma stared at him, the idea slowly taking root in her mind. Maybe this wasn't the day she had envisioned. But it was a day she could remember for the rest of her life. A day where love, not perfection, took center stage. With Max by her side, they could still make the vows they had promised each other. Even if it wasn't in the church, in front of 100 guests. They didn't need perfection. They just needed each other. Let's do it, Emma said, her voice full of determination. Let's have our wedding right here. Ben smiled softly, his eyes full of admiration. We'll make it perfect. In our own way. The clinic felt quieter now. The faint hum of machines and soft murmurs of other pet owners fading into the background as Emma and Ben sat together, still processing what had just happened. The air was thick with the heaviness of the moment. And Emma's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. She kept glancing at Maximum, who lay on a soft blanket beside them. His once vibrant eyes now dull and tired. He had always been so strong, his presence had always felt like a constant, unshakable force in her life. Now, here he was, fragile and weak, his future uncertain. Ben sat beside her, his arm wrapped around her shoulders as she leaned into him for comfort. He knew how much Max meant to Emma. The dog had been with her through every joy, every heartbreak, every significant moment of her life. To see him like this, so vulnerable, was a painful reminder of the inevitable passage of time. We should call everyone, Emma murmured. Her voice felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. Let them know what's going on with the wedding. Ben squeezed her shoulder gently, his voice calm and steady. We don't have to worry about that right now. We'll take care of Max first. Everything else can wait. His words were a comfort. But Emma couldn't shake the guilt that weighed on her. The wedding, the plans, the dress, the guests, they all felt so insignificant now. The day that had been carefully orchestrated for months was slipping away, replaced by something deeper, something more real. After a moment of silence, Emma stood up, her heart still heavy with the weight of the situation. She walked over to Maximum, kneeling beside him as she stroked his fur. His breathing was slow and labored, but there was still a faint glimmer of recognition when he looked up at her. He wasn't the same dog she had known, but he was still Maximum. And that was all that mattered. Ben joined her. Crouching down beside Maximum, he said softly, we could still have our wedding here. With Maximum. Emma turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. What do you mean? Ben took a deep breath, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I mean, let's not let today be about what we expected. Let's make it about what really matters. Love. family, and Maximum. He's been a part of our lives for so long, why not have him with us when we make our vows? Emma felt a surge of emotion. She hadn't considered that option. But it made perfect sense. She had never wanted her wedding to be about perfection, but about love, the kind of love that lasts, that endures through the tough moments. And right now, nothing mattered more than the love she had for Ben and the love she had for Max. I think that's a good idea, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Max should be here. He's been with me for so long. He's part of this journey. Ben smiled and took her hand. We'll make it beautiful. Emma. Just us. Our family. And Maximum. It'll be a day we'll always remember. They called the guests who had been waiting at the church and explained the situation. Many of them understood, offering words of sympathy and support. Emma's father, ever the rock in her life, promised to help organize the small ceremony in the clinic's waiting room. Within a short time, a few close friends and family members began to arrive, their faces a mixture of concern and understanding. The clinic's waiting room wasn't the grand setting Emma had envisioned. But as she stood there, looking around at the familiar faces of those who loved her, she realized that it didn't matter. In that room, surrounded by love, the ceremony would mean more than anything she could have imagined. Maximum, weak but determined, was brought to the front of the room. Emma carefully placed a small bowtie collar around his neck. A simple gesture that felt like a tribute to the years of companionship they had shared. As Max sat beside her, Emma's heart swelled. This was where she was meant to be, not in a church, not in a grand hall, but here, in this imperfect moment, with the people who mattered most, and with Max by her side. Let's do this, she whispered to Ben, her voice steady now, full of purpose. Ben nodded, his eyes filled with love and understanding. Let's make this day about what really matters. With that, they began the ceremony, not as a traditional wedding, but as an act of love, deep, real, and raw, just as their journey had always been. The vows they exchanged were simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. They promised to love, honor, and cherish each other, in the good times and the bad, for as long as they both should live. And as Emma said her vows, with Max by her side, she felt a peace settle over her, a peace that only love could bring. Even in the face of uncertainty, even as Max's time with them grew short, Emma knew that this was the right choice. This was her wedding day, imperfect but perfect in its own way. And Maximum, her loyal companion, was there, bearing witness to their love in the most meaningful way possible. The soft murmur of voices filled the veterinary clinic's waiting room, a stark contrast to the chaotic excitement that should have been taking place at the church. Yet, Emma found herself oddly at peace. The familiar faces of family and close friends gathered around her, offering quiet support, while Max sat by her side, wearing his bowtie collar as though he, too, understood the significance of this moment. This wasn't the wedding Emma had envisioned, but in a way, it felt more real, more meaningful. The small waiting room, with its sterile white walls and rows of uncomfortable chairs, became a sacred space in that instant. There were no flowers, no grand decorations, no aisle to walk down, but Emma realized that none of those things mattered. What mattered was the love she shared with Ben, the love they had built over the years, and the love that had been unwaveringly present from the moment Max had entered her life. Ben stood beside her, his hand in hers, both of them steady despite the unpredictability of the day. He gave her a look of deep affection, his eyes soft, as though he could sense the weight of everything she was feeling. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Emma nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. "I think I'm more than okay. This feels right. I'm with you. With Maximum and with the people who love us. That's all I really need." Ben smiled back, his heart full of love for her in that moment. This was his bride, not the one who had stood before him in the grand church, but the woman who was standing beside him now. grounded and true. In the face of life's challenges, her resilience, her ability to embrace the unexpected with such grace, made her even more beautiful to him than he had ever imagined. As their friends and family settled into their seats, Emma's father, who had quickly organized the impromptu ceremony, stepped forward with a kind smile. He was still adjusting to the unconventional nature of the day, but he was supportive. He cleared his throat before beginning. "We're here today not because of some grand plan or perfect ceremony," he began, his voice full of warmth. "We're here because Emma and Ben have found something truly special, a love that transcends the ordinary. They've shared this love for years. And now, they're making the choice to continue their journey together. And, as always, they are joined by the one constant in Emma's life, Maximum." Maximum, though visibly tired, sat next to Emma, his head resting on her lap. He may have been in pain, but he still held a place of importance in this moment. He wasn't just a dog, he was a testament to the loyalty and love that Emma and Ben had learned from him over the years. His calm presence, his steady breathing, was a reminder of what truly mattered: love, loyalty, and the unspoken bond that holds us together through thick and thin. Emma looked at Max as her father spoke, her eyes filled with emotion. "We're so lucky to have him with us," she whispered, almost to herself. "He's been my protector, my best friend. I don't know where I'd be without him." Ben squeezed her hand, his voice full of understanding. "We're lucky to have him, too." The ceremony itself was short and simple, but it was also deeply personal. There were no extravagant vows, no carefully crafted words to impress an audience. Instead, Emma and Ben spoke from the heart. They promised to continue supporting each other through life's trials, to face challenges together, and to never take each other for granted. "We're not just getting married today," Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. "We're choosing to be together for the rest of our lives. And that includes Max, who has been with me through everything, and will continue to be with us, in whatever time he has left." Ben nodded, his own emotions rising. "We're building a family, and that family includes you, Maximum. Always." Max's tail gave a weak thump against the floor, as though in agreement. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to remind Emma that her dog, though frail, was still part of this new chapter in her life. After the vows were exchanged, Emma and Ben shared a quiet kiss, the soft sounds of applause from their family and friends filling the room. The simple, intimate moment felt like the culmination of everything they had been through: every laugh, every tear, every moment of love and loss that had shaped their relationship. And in that moment, with Max by their side, Emma felt more deeply connected to Ben than ever before. As the ceremony concluded, the weight of everything that had happened that day began to settle in. Emma knew that things wouldn't be the same again. The day hadn't gone according to plan, but in many ways, it had been perfect, imperfectly perfect. The love between her and Ben had been celebrated, and Max had been there, sharing in the joy and the sorrow of the day. They spent the evening together in quiet reflection, each of them taking comfort in the presence of the other. Max rested beside them, his head on Emma's lap, as they all shared a peaceful silence, appreciating the small, fleeting moments that made life so beautiful. In that stillness, Emma realized that this was the essence of love: not the grand gestures, not the perfect days, but the quiet moments shared in the face of imperfection. In the moments that truly mattered, she had learned that love was never just about the big celebrations or the perfect timing. It was about showing up for each other, through the highs and the lows, with loyalty, devotion, and an open heart. And that was the real lesson of the day. It was a lesson Max had taught her every day of his life. Months passed, and life continued on in its own quiet way, though Emma could never quite forget the feeling of that day. The wedding that had been so full of love and meaning, despite its untraditional setting, became a cherished memory, one that she would hold close to her heart for the rest of her life. But just as life had moved on, So had time. And with it, Max's health slowly deteriorated. Each passing day a reminder that the precious moments they had with him were slipping away. It had been a quiet Tuesday morning when Emma noticed that Max was having even more trouble moving. He had always been slow in recent months. But now he struggled just to stand up. His once shiny coat had grown dull. And his usually warm eyes seemed clouded with a deep sadness. As if he knew something Emma couldn't yet face. "Ben," she called, her voice breaking as she looked at Maximum. "I think it's time. I don't want to wait too long." Ben, who had been working in the garden outside, quickly came in, his expression softening when he saw Max lying on his favorite rug. He bent down beside him, stroking the dog's fur with gentle hands. "I think you're right," Ben whispered, his own voice thick with emotion. "It's never easy. But we owe it to him to let him go when it's time. He's been our constant. And now we have to give him the peace he deserves." Emma sat down beside them, her heart breaking into a million pieces. Max had been with her through so much: her childhood, the loss of her mother, her struggles in life, and most recently, her wedding. He had been more than a pet, he had been family. The thought of saying goodbye to him felt impossible. As they prepared to take Max to the veterinary clinic one last time, Emma felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had promised herself she would always be there for him. But the thought of letting go of him, of allowing him to pass, was one she could not bear. Yet, she knew that Max deserved peace. He had carried her through so many dark times, it was time to let him rest. At the clinic, the air was filled with the soft sounds of comfort as the vet gently reassured them. "It's clear Max has had a good life," Dr. Carter said, his voice low and compassionate. "He's loved. And he's given so much in return. We can help him pass with dignity." Emma held Max's head in her lap as they prepared to say their final goodbye. She stroked his fur, whispering the words she had never thought she would say. "Thank you, Maximum. Thank you for everything. I love you so much." Ben stood by her side, his hand on her shoulder. He understood the pain she was feeling. They had shared so much with Max: laughter, tears, moments of joy, and moments of loss. Now, it was time to face the hardest part of love: letting go. As Max drifted off, Emma closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. She felt a deep emptiness, the kind that only the loss of someone so dear could create. But as she sat there, holding Max's lifeless body, a strange peace began to settle over her. She had done the best she could for him. She had loved him unconditionally, and he had done the same for her. When they left the clinic, the world seemed a little less bright, a little quieter. The emptiness of their home felt too large, too consuming. Max's bed, which had once been a comforting presence, now seemed like an aching reminder of the space he used to fill. But in the months that followed, Emma began to reflect on what Max had taught her. He had shown her what it meant to love unconditionally, to be present, to care without hesitation. And as much as her heart hurt from his absence, she realized that the love they shared would never truly leave her. She and Ben had long talks about their plans for the future, about the family they hoped to build, the home they would share, and the lessons they would pass on to their children. Max's legacy was something they wanted to honor, not just through memories, but through action. They both knew they couldn't replace him, but they could continue to live by the values he had instilled in them. A few months after Max's passing, Emma and Ben decided to adopt another dog, an older, senior dog named Duke. He was a large, gentle mixed breed who had been abandoned at a shelter. His eyes were full of the same quiet wisdom that Max's had once held. And as they brought Duke home, Emma couldn't help but feel that, in a way, Max's spirit was still there, guiding them. They gave Duke the same care and love they had given Maximum. It was a way of honoring the legacy of the dog who had taught them so much about the importance of family, love, and living fully in the moment. As Emma and Ben sat together on their porch one evening, Duke curled up beside them. Emma thought back to that wedding day. The one that had been so unexpected yet perfect in its own way. It was a day that had shown her that love wasn't about perfection or grandeur. It was about being there for one another. Through every trial. And cherishing the moments that really mattered. And that, she realized, was Max's greatest gift to her.